Welcome, everybody, to the Ruby Rose. I'm John Epperson. Today on our panel, we have Luke Stutters.
Hello.
And Darren Bromer.
Greetings and salutations.
And Valentino Stoll.
Hey there.
And Valentino, you're just joining us for the first time today. Would you maybe just tell everybody a little bit about yourself and why you're so famous?
You may know me from my previous time on the show here where I talked about IRB's internals, but I'm a software engineer at Doximity. It's a social network for doctors, and I hack on Ruby and other various stuff all day long.
And you are wearing your special Ruby t-shirt today, Valentino.
Oh yeah, I made this. It's from a past company I worked at where we did Rails as a service, and we were advertising, we'll fix your Rails app.
It seems super appropriate for a company that does doctor stuff in Ruby at the same time.
Funny enough, right?
We should take a screenshot of it or something. And then as a guest today, we have Fabio Perrella, and if you would correct my pronunciation a little bit.
Yeah, you said correctly. Fabio Perrella, we say in Portuguese. It's like an Italian surname.
That's fair. I have to admit that Italian was actually the worst of my diction. I was actually better at French than I was at Italian. I was a music major, so we had to take diction class or whatever. I don't know why. It just was. It's even close to Latin, which I feel like is pretty easy for me.
I don't know how to speak Italian, but my grandparents, they know.
Yeah, fair enough. I was just bad at it.
Did you work your tail off to get that senior developer gig just to realize that senior dev doesn't actually mean dream job? I've been there too. My first senior developer job was at a place where all of our triumphs were the bosses and all the failures were ours. The second one was a great place to continue to learn and grow, only for it to go under due to poor management. And now I get job offers from great places to work all the time. Not only that, but the last job interview I actually sat in was a discussion about how much my podcast had helped the people interviewing me. If you're looking for a way to get into your dream job, then join our Dev Heroes Accelerator. Not only will we help you get the kind of exposure that makes you attractive to your dream employer, but you'll be able to ask them for top dollar as well. Check it out at devheroesaccelerator.com.
So, we have you on the show today to talk about a number of things, but primarily, we thought we would talk about debugging processes and how you do that. And you recently wrote an article about that and things and stuff. So let's dive in.
Yeah.
So from a high level, do you want to take us through your debugging process, and then maybe we can just start plucking away at it?
Okay. First, let me say that I am a software engineer. I work at WeTransfer.com here in the Netherlands. I'm from Brazil, but I moved to the Netherlands last year with my family. And so I was working there, and that there was a problem that the guys from the platform team told us that there were too many requests to our KIM agent. This KIM agent is something in the AWS ecosystem that we use to provide credentials in the production environment. And it's good to say that I am a senior engineer. I work with Ruby since 2009 or so. But when I was in Brazil, I worked in a hosting company. So we didn't use AWS because we had our own servers. So I'm new in this ecosystem with AWS. And then everything was new for me. So I started trying to understand the problem, and we use AppSignal. And I could see lots of requests to an endpoint that he told that was the problem. And it was like an IP and only this. So if I didn't know about this context, because I would only see this IP on AppSignal, and I would imagine, oh, what is this IP? So they told me this is the IP that the endpoint of AWS, the credentials instance responds to credentials. Then I started, because they said, oh, there must be a cache mechanism to not request to this endpoint every time, because these tokens, the credentials, they had a lifetime of a few minutes, so it wasn't working as we expected. And then I started the investigation and the things that I wrote in my article, and then so I can start talking about that if you want. Yeah, I can go deeply.
Yeah, let's establish the story. Or so. Also, thanks for telling us a little bit about yourself. I totally forgot to ask.
Okay.
That's completely on me. So it sounds like basically what was going on is you had some requests that were like more or less timing out, which is the awesome error that we all love to see because it tells us nothing about what's going on and it scares the bejesus out of us. And we're like, oh no, my day's gone now. I have to figure this thing out. And you had some timeouts and you happened to figure out that it was an issue with you needed to grab some credentials. And so then now you have to figure out what's up. Maybe it's caching. You have lots of things going through your mind at this point.
Yeah, and let me say about the application. This application, the name is Storm, is our new storage manager. So, because at WeTransfer, we store a lot of files on S3. And so we have like a service to manage this because we reuse some piece of files we call blocks. So there is like intelligence to not duplicate files. And so it interacts a lot with AWS. So we with SQS, S3, and then in this one of these endpoints of Storm, we noticed the response time was higher than we expected, and one of the reasons was maybe actually the thing that it was took longer was these requests to the AWS endpoint. So we need to figure out what was happening, and then I started to look how the AWS SDK works to cache the credentials, and then so I remember the first thing. So okay, I know this IP. I need to find where in the gem is requesting this IP because it's not on our source code. So I started like to grab in the source code of the gem. I used like a bundle show to see where the gem was installed. And then I grabbed all the directory to search when this IP was used. Then I found a place. Then I started the debugging process. And then when I found it, I thought, oh, maybe I can add something here, a bind pry. Then I will run the tests on my computer. Then I will get to this point and I will be able to debug it and understand what is happening. So then I tried it and the debugger was never stopped there. And then after a few interactions, I realized that this code works differently in production. Because when we are on our laptop, in a local environment, we use a different kind of credentials to AWS. We use like a pair of keys. And then after, I discovered inside the AWS gem that there are many kinds of credential resolvers. There is a name for that. And so I understand that in my machine it works in a way, in production it works differently. So I wasn't able to debug it in my laptop because the code wasn't executing that path. So okay, then I needed to debug it in production, but how would I do it? Because I can't use a debugger in production. I can't run my tests there.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. You can debug in production.
Yeah, so I found a way.
You shouldn't, but you can.
Then at WeTransfer, I can access the Rails console. Actually, it's not a Rails, but it's the console in production because we use Kubernetes and I can access them and go to the console. So I used metaprogramming to change the code in the way that I wanted. Because when we use metaprogramming, we are only changing the code in my process. I'm not affecting the service which is running in production for the clients. So it's not so risky. I can do some things to figure out what is happening.
Would you clarify what you mean here by metaprogramming?
Okay, so I discovered like a class inside the AWS gem that I was suspecting that I needed to add like a puts inside to understand what was happening, and like a method. Then I created a module and I used a module prepend to extend this class in production. Okay. And then when the real code call this method, it would run my module, because it was like overwriting everything. And then with that, I could add some messages to debug it to understand what was happening. And then I could see. In the end, the problem was every time I call a specific method, it was generating a new credentials. And we expected the credentials to be cached, and it wasn't cached. And then I started to search on the internet, because I tried the AWS docs to see how we should use the client to have this cache working the correct way. And then in the end, I discovered when you use a client of S3 and SQS, every time we create a new instance of the client, the cache will not use cache, because the cache it's saved inside the instance of the client. So I couldn't create a new client every time, every request. And this is what was happening. So there were no cache. So in the end, the solution was very easy. It was like caching the client. So we chose to use a singleton. This client, it was instantiated inside a gem. Then we have the gem is like specialized in signing lots of S3 URLs, and so because this is a thing that we do every time at we transfer, and then we changed these gems to cache the AWS client. So inside the AWS gem, they have like a mechanism to cache the credentials to expire then after 10 or 15 minutes. So it works. So you can't create lots of instances. You need to reuse them. So this is how we solved. So in the end, the solution was easy, but the process to find was very difficult, because I couldn't understand. I didn't know how it worked in the beginning.
There is a reason why we call caching one of the hard problems in computer science.
Yeah.
Cache and validation, not caching.
Memoization will always get you.
In this case, the memoization was working fine inside the instance. It's just you didn't memorize the client.
Memorize the wrong thing, right?
I learned a lot from this blog article, and the highlight thing here was, just like you, I thought when I've been talking to AWS, there's two passwords on it. There's the access key, and then there's the super secret ID key, and you just put those in your, copy and paste them into your source code where they're saved, and then you run and you talk to it, and it's no problem. I didn't realize that Amazon had a kind of extra secure system where, instead of those credentials safely in the source code where they should be, then it has a way of almost kind of requesting instances on demand. Is that how it works?
Yeah, they call the metadata endpoint. And because they say that it's not so safe to spread these credentials in lots of servers. So we have this KIM agent, which is something, I don't know exactly the details, but it's something related to Kubernetes. They provide credentials to the pods, to the containers, and then the containers request the credentials from these agents. It requests, it's like an internal network, only reachable by the pods. And then we get like the credentials. They are temporary. They last like 15 minutes, I think. So inside the AWS Gen, there are many credential providers. So one of them is the one that you mentioned when we use like the keys. So the other one is that I mentioned that we use. They call instance profile, but there are others. So there are many.
Yeah, that was really interesting. It's not something I've seen before. And my understanding of it is that you assign the ability to your code to go and get some credentials while it's running, but you don't explicitly have the credentials it's using. And this is to do with, I think you said it was rotating credentials?
Yeah, we don't need to rotate credentials by using this in production, because when you see the code in production, you ask yourself, well, where are the credentials? Because I was used to have the credentials in my laptop. Then in production, I couldn't find the credentials. It took me some time to understand how it worked. Actually, today I don't know all the details, but I understand the piece that I needed to understand to resolve this problem. So this is interesting to say, because sometimes we have problems, then we don't know maybe nothing, and then we don't know to know everything. We need to know the pieces, then we need to know to fix something. So if you want to know everything, you can't. It's almost impossible.
It's also a tough topic to like. It's very abstract, right? Like, so it's based off of like Amazon's IAM stuff, right?
Yeah.
Which is basically like, hey, I want to give somebody a role, more or less, right? And it's also like specific to Kubernetes here in this case, which is like, hey, I have this one Kubernetes pod. It's going to need credentials that just belong to this pod that allow it to do the things that it needs to do.
Yeah, that's it. This is how it works.
So you did the tried and true, test it out locally, and you're like, huh, that's weird. It doesn't work at all locally. Can't get it going. And then you like dug down and you were like, oh, well, that's why. It's because it works differently in production. So then you had to jump into your production or staging environment or something that runs like production at least. And monkey patch. Well, I guess you weren't monkey patching because you were prepending, but yeah, insert some code so that you could finally debug or whatever. And then you figured out what the problem is and got it going. So
isn't prepending the same thing as monkey patching?
It is not.
Yeah,
but go
it's a way. I think it is a way to do monkey patching. Before I said metaprogramming, but the correct word is monkey patch. I said wrongly. But we can overwrite a class for monkey patching, I think, and we can also use prepend. I prefer using prepend, because if something happens in the stack trace, we will note that there is another level of class, another in the front.
This mention of your method logging, something I'm really interested in, because I remember there was a Rails conf recently on the case of the bad clone, where they shed some light on basically making a monkey patch like you had on object as an example, to just log any instance that this method gets called, so that you have the stack trace in a isolated context. I'm curious if you made your own kind of prepended module for that, or if you relied on another library.
No, I used only Ruby. I copied the name of the class and the methods of the AWS gen, and I created a module by myself, only use Ruby, and then I use a prepend in the end to put this in the front of the original implementation and I did that in the IRB, the Ruby console. I didn't deploy a new version with that.
It's funny because I know I've done something very similar in the past too, right? Where you're trying to find out what is calling a particular method, and sometimes it helps to just mix in something and say, okay, anytime this method gets called, log it, and then call the whatever called me kind of thing. It's something I was surprised Ruby didn't have natively, where you could kind of attach something to a method call.
Yeah, that's a good call out. And actually, I really enjoyed your article also, and you walking us through it. I think it's extremely valuable, and it's good to think about. I think our mental model of where we spend time, I think engineers often think we spend about 80% of our time writing code, maybe 10% reading code, maybe the other 10% in meetings. And I think in reality, we probably spend about 80% of our time debugging, debugging or reading existing code. So these are great things to do or to focus on. But I guess my thought is there has to be an easier way. There should, ideally, you shouldn't have to go through seemingly so much trouble to use gems. And I think it boils down to observability. If you're using a gem and you're not able to, or any piece of code, and you're not able to observe what's going on, like that's really the problem. Once there are metrics, whether that be in the form of data points in CloudWatch, let's say, or log statements, there are nice tools to be able to search occurrences over time in log files. Like then the debugging gets to be a lot easier. But anyway, that was something that struck me as like, man, this is really, really cool and interesting. And it's so complicated. Like, what are some of the takeaways that you from going through this adventure and doing your debugging and the monkey patch or meta programming? Like, is it the kind of built-in, I guess, callbacks or logging, if you will, that Valentino mentioned, or what do you think?
The monkey patch, I use it to some messages, some puts to understand the flow that was executing in production, and it helped me to understand what was happening. But yeah, I want to say about the article that I wrote. It was very hard to write, and I wrote because people at WeTransfer they told me, oh, you need to write a blog post about it because it was impressive the way that you debugged the things the way you did. And so when I started, it was difficult to tell the story because I would like to give all the details to tell exactly how I did it. And then I started to find, like in Slack, the message that I sent on GitHub, the issues, the images that I printed. So I could give a lot of details to the person. And especially for me today, if I need to remember something about it, I go to the article and then I have all the information there. And it helped me as well. And I think it would be easier if I found some information about the result that we have in the end. Because when you see the AWS docs, they don't mention about using the same instance of the client. I think I found it only in the Java SDK docs, but not in the Ruby docs, saying that you need to reuse the client because the cache, the credentials cache is stored inside. So actually, it's something that I can do. I can try to create an issue there, or maybe a pull request. I don't know if they accept a pull request, but I think this piece of information would help many people. And I would like talking about debug. When I started to debug it, I always try to reproduce the things in my computer. First, and I try to create a test, then I can run the problem. Because when I can do it, I can use pry by bug, which is like my favorite tool to debug. Because I can run the next command. I can use the step in, the up and down. There are many commands that I can use to navigate through the stack trace, and it helps me a lot to understand the flow. So, but in this case, it wasn't possible because I couldn't reproduce it on my laptop. But this is my first approach, usually.
Yeah, I just want to put a +1 in there. So way back in the day before Bybug was around, we had pry, and there was a pry debugger gem, if I recall correctly. It was cool because you got a debugger, but there was some weirdness to it and stuff like that. Then Bybug came out, and debugging with pry is amazing now. It just works. It's great. So that's my +1.
Yeah, and I definitely recommend people to try the commands up, especially the command up. I don't know if you ever use it because you can stop in a piece of code, then you type up, then it goes up in the stack trace. So you can see how the code reached at this point. So it's like a step back. So it's very, very cool. It helps a lot.
So you can undo mistakes.
Yeah, it does not undo, but it goes up in the stack trace. Actually, there is a command to go back. But yeah, it's kind of.
That's really cool. I never knew that existed in Pry.
Yeah,
you can do just backtrace, or is it?
Yeah, backtrace. Yeah,
that'll just print out the whole thing as well.
Yeah, But if you use the command up, it will return to the previous frame. They say frame, which is one level above in the or below. In the
Will
trace.
it change the context as well?
Yeah,
So all the variables are reset in that step.
Yeah, you can inspect the variables. It's very cool.
I didn't know about pry bybug at all. I'd never used this. I used pry. I didn't know this existed. Recently, I've taken to running the Ruby debugger in VS Code, and this has been my amazing step forward in the last few months that I can actually get a GUI again after years of Vim keyhole coding. But yeah, bybug is like a kind of interactive bug debugger. So instead of just kind of copy pasting put s, embedded string, kind of loads of strings everywhere, you can kind of just jump in and see it without needing to have a complete debug environment. Amazing. No, didn't know it. Awesome. Never even heard of it. How do you guys find out about this stuff?
Actually, a few years ago, I was debugging like a lot, and I thought I wasn't like so efficient in this process. Then I started to study more. I thought I want to understand more how this tool works, because I need to use everything that I can. So I tried like all the commands that we have in the pry and bybug gen. Actually, I use the pry bybug, which is like a mix of pry gen and the bybug gen. So I think it's the best one. And then these commands, the up command, there is another one, the finish, because the finish works like this. Imagine you use the command step. The step is like step in, when you go into a method and you think, I don't want to see all this method. So you can use the finish. It will finish the execution of the current method and come back to the previous one. So it helps a lot as well. And so I discovered these methods from bybug. And then I did a presentation in the RubyConf Brazil 2014. I don't know exactly. I don't remember. And it was very nice. People liked the presentation.
I'll add this into the picks later, but a good way to find out about this kind of stuff, Luke, is I've been reading Ruby Weekly for forever now. Just every week. Just comes out once a week. I spend half of my Wednesday just reading articles and learning new stuff. And maybe not half, but probably at least a couple hours, right? Just reading through the things that come in. And I do that every week, and I've done it every week for a really long time. So I don't know everything, and there's plenty of stuff that comes through that just goes over my head, right? But the fact is, I'm legitimately just reading stuff every week, and so I think that doing that, helps you find out about stuff. You'll catch some of it. I'll catch different stuff, and then we'll hop on the show, and you'll tell me about the cool stuff that you found, and I'll tell you about the cool stuff I found.
Yeah, talking about cool stuff, there is a new debugger. I tried, but I like pry bybug so much that I am not using. The name is Ruby Jard. It's a very, I don't know if you ever
Can you spell that in chat?
Jard.
We'll put a link into that, the show notes.
Isn't it just another Ruby debugger? I think that's what the acronym is.
Yeah.
Yeah. The interface is very, very cool. It's like, have you ever used Tick, the Git client in command line? So it's like similar. It shows like the variables, the values, the point that the debugger is running. It shows like all the commands that you can run. It's very, very nice. But I was using the pry bybug, and then I come back.
I'm going to release a new library called Yard, yet another Ruby debugger. It's just going to be an alias for put string.
It won't conflict with Yard, the Ruby doc thing.
Yeah, we'll just open up documentation.
Yeah, I need a better acronym. You're right, but I guess I don't know, Luke. Maybe you're in my camp based on your previous comment, but I tend to debug using put string until it just doesn't work. So, like, I don't know. Maybe I'm one of those people who just VI command line and put string are in my toolbox.
No, I start with puts. And then, that's actually not true. The first thing that I do is a binding.pry if I can get one easily. Then I go to puts statements combined with getting a binding.pry somewhere, right? So I want to know put statements up here to like tell me what I did, And then, okay, so now I know about my past state. And then now I'm in my REPL, right? And then I can compare with the variables that I have here, right? So I don't know. I guess maybe I'm technically a mix, but
Yeah, no, I
find
think that's a
myself doing
good
lots of
mix. I think
fixes.
the puts helps you narrow down where the problem is quickly, and then then you can use the other tools in the toolbox.
Yep. I almost always want a REPL, but I never use just a REPL pretty much. I almost always am putting some stuff up here in order to know what stuff I did before I got to the place.
There is another kind of technique that I use sometimes. It's not adding puts, but it's adding raise. So for example, I know the problem is it's like here. So I add a raise to raise an exception, and then I run all the tests to see what tests will raise the exception. So I will discover which tests are running at this point. When I find a test, then I change the raise by binary pry. Then I can run the test and debug with debug.
I have one app that I've used that technique with. It wasn't a Ruby app at all. It was a React Native app or whatever. And I found it easier to raise exceptions and have it send messages to my exception logging service or whatever. Yeah, I haven't done it in a Ruby thing. And I think that I would argue that's probably because I work on apps where the test suites take longer than a half hour to run.
Oh yeah.
Which is a completely different conversation entirely.
Yeah, this is not the case in this application that I mentioned because it is a new application and the tests run in 30 seconds, I think.
Yeah, I could see that being a workable technique for sure.
Yeah, to extend on the use of put string and log statements in general, if you are developing or operating on AWS, I mean, the other platforms have similar tools, but the CloudWatch logs insights, I remember when that was first released, it was so nice to have. So if I'm logging something in my, app in my container or my Ruby code, whatever it is, I can very easily use the CloudWatch insights to search for occurrences of some string pattern over time. And it'll give you right away, it gives you the graph. And so like Fabio, in your case, once you have the logging in place, once you have some visibility to when it's creating a new client or making a new call, you get a bar graph and you can easily see like, oh, okay, the volume is much higher than I thought it would be, or it peaks or dips at when you might not expect. But it's a super powerful tool if you are running on AWS and you do heavily, even if there's a lot of use cases for it, but Insights is very handy to have.
Hey, folks, if you love this podcast and would like to support the show, or if you wish you could listen without the sponsorship messages, then you're in luck. We're setting up new premium podcast feeds where you can get all of the episodes released after Christmas 2020 without the ads. Signing up will help us pay for editing and production, and you can go sign up at devchat.tv/premium.
Nice. Yeah, actually, we use AppSignal, and we have lots of information there. So we could see these requests that I mentioned in the beginning of the episode, and the volume, the throughput, the mean time. So the information, and actually in the end, when the problem was solved, we noticed the decrease of the throughput to this endpoint, and this was the result that we was expecting. And yeah, so this helped a lot.
It's interesting. We were talking at the beginning of the episode about cache invalidation being one of the hard problems, and that kind of came into play here. Memoization, maybe that's not a misnomer, or maybe that's misinterpreted a little bit, because essentially, your classes were getting instantiated more often than you thought. And so, what is programming? Well, it's essentially things that we store data in memory and we have instructions that act against it. So essentially saying cache invalidation is a difficult problem is almost like saying half of computing is challenging, because whether we're keeping an object on the stack or whether we are having to reinstantiate it, that was the cause here. But
Thank you,
as I think about it more, yeah, so basically it's saying half of programming is hard.
Well, think about it in this case, right? So this is a cache invalidation problem. This is a problem where you were invalidating your cache all the time, accidentally, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, no, thanks, Darren, for bringing this up. I was legitimately wanting to go on this train too, right? the reason why I like bring it up jokingly all the time is because I legitimately think that you can the other guy can say whatever they want. You can not pay attention. You can probably bring up cache invalidation as being a problem. I just shortened it to caching, obviously, and it is like almost all the time true.
And it
Because you're
was
almost always doing that.
I can say it was when we fixed this problem. This problem was inside two gens. One of the gens is the gen that signs S3 URLs, is a gen that we built at WeTransfer, and the other gen is SQer, is a gen to deal with background jobs using AWS SQS. And then when we fixed this problem inside of these gens, we released a new version. All of other services that use this gen started to use to make less requests to the AWS endpoint. So the platform team told us, "Oh, that was a great work, because now the number of requests decreased a lot in the agents." Yeah, so it helped the community as well, because these gems are open source and people use everywhere.
Yeah, one way to try to avoid things like this would be, don't cache unless you absolutely have to. So that's one thing. I will say I have had some insight. So we were talking about authentication. So the authentication service in AWS, I think is probably, I don't remember exact numbers. They probably wouldn't want me to share them even if I did remember them, but that's one of the highest volume services there is. Like literally, if there wasn't caching involved, I think probably the service would fall over, just the sheer number. So you really can't avoid it there. But going back to kind of the theoretical discussion, I mean, this is almost an argument for a lot of functional programming is becoming more and more popular as a way to avoid these kind of issues. I mean, from a purist perspective, functional programming doesn't really cache much at all, because in general, I can always call the function with the same parameters and I'm always going to get back the same answer. There's very little that's cached. From a pragmatic perspective, yeah, obviously we have to remember data somewhere, but to the extent that you can reduce it, maybe you can see then the argument for why that would help, that would lead to less error prone or fewer bugs in your code. I'm having a hard time saying that in English, but I think you know what I mean.
So jumping in, this is my favorite topic. So the thing with like functional and OOP stuff, right? Like functional is really good at calculating stuff, and OOP is really good at storing state, right? And one of the things that I was going to actually bring up before you jumped in here first is like, when you think about it, like when we store values in variables, what are we doing? We're caching them for later, right? Like literally one of the very basic things that we do, putting stuff in registers, storing stuff in variables, right? Like those are all caching, right? Like because recalculating everything every freaking second is like, it's expensive, right? So like one of the things that like I feel like is like the whole functional versus OOP argument just kind of like blows over and doesn't even talk about is there are appropriate times to calculate stuff and there are appropriate times to cache stuff. And functional programming, really good at calculating stuff, right? OOP, very good at storing state, right? So I feel like one of the awesome things about Ruby, and this is why it becomes my favorite topic, is because we get to do both. We have first class functional style programming in our language. We have first class OOP style language, right? Use OOP stuff when you want to cache stuff, right? Create an object, memoize the heck out of it, right? Never recalculate it again. Just cache it all, right? It's great. Invalidate it when you need it, right? Obviously I'm like just glossing over stuff as if this is easy, and we just discussed the fact that it's not, but like that's exactly use your tools like for what they're good at. Like I am a huge proponent of mixing OOP with functional style. I think that if you think about the problem that you're working on and you're like, this thing is like a process, right? Something that needs to be calculated. Functional style, throw it on there, it'll be right. If I'm storing state for later for some reason, or if I'm abstracting state from my database, which is what models are, right? OOP all the way, right? Like, I don't know. That's my thing. That's what I think.
No, I totally agree. You want to use the right tool for the job. Like if you really are in love with one tool or another and you want to use it everywhere, you're probably going to have challenges at some point. So for example, active models, like you said, it's inherently storing state so that I can mutate it and update my database. That would be probably not very productive to make that a functional paradigm. It just wouldn't make sense. So without a doubt. I think that the functional paradigm is probably underused. Like I think we could go on the spectrum a little bit more towards that, look for more opportunities to do it. But totally agree with you. There are places for each.
I think one of the hard parts about Ruby is there's no real like global state. So if, for example, in one of these clients, I know I find this hard all the time when you're starting up a Rails app and you want to say share a S3 client connection across the app or a Redis connection. You often have initializer that boots up with the app and then is cached for the lifetime of the instance of that particular app running, right? If you share that across servers, it'll be broken up across those servers. So there's no like kind of shared global state within Ruby. It's kind of like virtualized. So there's almost no way to, and maybe it's just the wrong way to do it, but there's no way to kind of cache across objects so that you do have kind of a global state for a particular thing that you're trying to make sure doesn't change over the lifetime of a particular run.
You can use global variables. A really common case for this is you probably do this with Redis, right? So if you use Sidekick or something, you probably have like a global variable $Redis, right? Maybe you don't, but you've probably seen it. It's really common for you to instantiate one Redis connection, right? Store it in that Redis variable, and then like let your Sidekick connect to it. And then maybe if you like use Redis also for like your caching or something, maybe you share it, or maybe you choose later, you're like, oh, I shouldn't share my caching server with, because I want a different Redis technique to be used. Redis like to disk. Redis will disk out every once in a while, right? So you want a different, whether it's whatever, get rid of the last thing or the oldest thing, right, for caching, which is normal, but like for Sidekick, you don't want that strategy. Anyway, so you might split it out later, but it's not uncommon for you to share connection.
I was going to say something similar. Like, yeah, sometimes I put a $sign in front of the variable and then I feel guilty about it.
Yeah, you do. You can have a global variable. You can also create a singleton. Yeah.
Well, I was going to circle back to Fabio's article here in the kind of dangers of using singleton, because it kind of mentions it's not necessarily thread safe to have a singleton because it can change across instances.
I would mention that because we were not sure about the AWS gems if they were thread safe. So one of the options was using a connection pool, and in that way, the same connection would be used for more than one instance. Not we use the connection, but then we found that the AWS gem is thread safe. Then we chose to use the singleton, because when you are not sure, it's better using the gem connection pool and providing as a pool, which will create, like you usually set a pool size, for example, 10 connections. It will create 10, and it will manage these connections for those who need to use.
I mean, what does thread safe really mean? When people say thread safe, what do they mean? What's going to happen? What's the worst that can happen? Surely it'll be okay. I mean, we just connected to AWS. We're fine.
I think, for example, we use Puma. They are threads. We can use Sidekick, which use threads as well. And these singleton clients, they can be shared across these threads. And they can, if the client is not thread safe, they can like send comments to the dependency at the same time and mix requests and response, so it can damage things. So yeah, I think this is the problem that we can face if it's not thread safe.
I think thread safe means that there exists a category of bugs for which we can actually blame or not blame the gem. We have to look directly in the mirror. I think that's what thread safe means.
Yeah.
I like that one. I'm buying it now. My explanation would have been way more complicated.
I was trying to think of the simplest possible definition, and that's what came to mind.
Good definition.
No, it works. And I think a good point that was just brought up here, right? Like to kind of like tie back into our conversation is just the connection pool, right? Like also another option. Like everything, right? Like you need to evaluate whether global variable is the right thing for you, a singleton is right, and they all have different cons and pros and cons or whatever. So you just kind of got to pick what makes sense. this is like what I like to call like having multiple tools in your toolkit, right? Like it's good to have multiple tools and to be able to like draw on them for different scenarios, because some of the things that we call anti-patterns are actually the correct pattern for use in certain particular cases. We call them anti-patterns because you should not use them most of the time. So singletons and global variables are great examples of this, but they actually are good choices in a select, very few small number of cases.
Definition of anti-pattern. There exists someone in the world who once had a problem doing it that way. Okay, that one was maybe a little bit.
That's a little unfair.
That's a bit much. Yeah, sorry.
No, like anti-pattern means most people have problems when they use the pattern, but the reason why these patterns exist and why they're still taught and things like that is because there is some use case out there for which it is the right pattern.
It's the 80-20 rule. Yeah, most of patterns are things you want to do most of the time, unless you find a compelling reason to do it a different way.
I can tell a problem that we discovered last week with this singleton, because these gens, they create the instance stores inside of it, in the singleton. And then something was happening in the state, and then the credential started to be invalid, and AWS started to return bad credentials. And because the credentials were cached inside the gen, we needed to restart the service suddenly. And we didn't understand what was happening. And so I created a patch in these gems to release the singleton, the cache, when these kind of exceptions are raised, because it was like exceptions from AWS, and I could rescue them and release the client. So this is one example of problem that it can happen with this approach.
Yeah.
Fabio, I had a question about kind of your process debugging. If there was a tool or library or service or something that you wish you had available while you're going through all of this, especially with like a production level issue where you can only reproduce it in production, is there something you wish that you had available to you?
Yes, there is. I just remember that, because sometimes it's very difficult to understand the flow of the code, because there are lots of levels, and you start in your source code, then it goes to a gen, to another gen, and it passes variables, it changes state. And it would be great if I had like something to click record, and then I execute the command, and it records all the message that's passing through the levels. And then in the end, I could like press play and see what happened. It's like it's different than using a debugger. It's like a sequence diagram. When you see the interactions, you see the message going to the other objects. It will be great.
I'm trying to think of a parallel, like the full story service. Have you ever used that for user experience? It's a service that lets you replay exactly what the user did for a particular bug. So when an exception is raised, it gives you that recording history of the user's experience. It would almost be nice to have that parallel on a systems level.
Yeah, definitely.
I kind of like the idea of dropping like state and comments in your code. I was imagining that. I was like, that seems super useful.
I saw that. Talking about comments, there is something that I would like to mention. When we fixed this problem, it was, as I said, the fix was simple, only to create a singleton. But for those who would see the implementation, wouldn't understand why we did that thing. So I think it is important, and I learned that working with my team, the team that I'm working now, and to add comments explaining why you did that thing. Because you don't need to add comments to explain what the code does, because you can see the code, you can understand what are the inputs, sometimes the output, but usually it's difficult to understand why. So my suggestion is you add comments explaining why.
Motivation. Yep.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny because there used to be the saying to remove comments and add a tracker story so that you don't just leave to-do comments everywhere. And now it seems people are coming back to the idea of it would be nice to have a comment in here.
I like to put them in the Git commits. Like I feel like, so for me, motivation is like, so I always do like 80 character, right, description, right, like of what you did, but then like skip a line and then like I do hyphens and I'm like, if I did any extra things for some reason, put those in there. But then I'm motivation, like that's like a major thing for me to put in there. Like, why the heck did I bother to make this change at all? If it was like a bug fix, like maybe you don't necessarily need that, right? Like you can make the judgment call on whether. But I don't know. I'm a big fan of putting in Git commits.
Yeah,
But
it
I think
works.
it's the same thing. You're commenting and it's stuck with the Git repo, so it's like right there. It's not in a separate thing like making a ticket would do.
Yeah, I
You
agree.
do have to look further because you have to look at the history, I guess.
Most of my to-dos actually end up being won't do's. And I usually know if I'm going to do them or not by the number of question marks next to the to-do comment. And it usually looks like something, to do, check if I need to do this, question mark. And I just came back to one last night, this morning, that was like kind of 4 years old. Is there something I can kind of, instead of typing to do, probably won't do, is a bit long, won't do. Is there like a kind of another word for a to do which you should do but you never will?
Might do.
Hmm.
I'm with you. After you go back to your code, like, okay, well, before we do this update, let's grep for any to-dos. And generally speaking, what happens is if there's still the to-do comment in there, you end up taking it out because it became OBE. It's no longer relevant if it's still sitting there.
Yeah, I'm not. My big thing is like I often find that the comments, right, like never get updated with the code, so deleted, right? Because obviously that commenting wasn't very helpful. But that's not always the case. I don't know. I'm not anti comments, but I don't know. People don't typically do a good job of keeping the comments up with the code at the same time. I mean, there's a reason why we like the principle of dry, right? Change things in one place, because trying to keep two things in sync is difficult, but it can be done.
Yeah, one thing I've started doing is adding trailer information. I don't know if anybody has seen, but Git added a feature that allows you to add kind of a tagging comment section to each commit so that you can then search on those logs for particular tags and see kind of the footnotes of that commit and search across it. It's kind of neat.
This is trailer as in park.
Yes, sir.
No, I have not heard of that. Is this, I mean, you've got your first line if you commit, which John says people get angry if you go over 80 characters. Should clearly be 96 characters, but 80 it is. Then you've got the next bit where you write what you actually did. So where does the trailer go?
So it's almost like if you've ever squashed commits, they'll show you that kind of commented squashed commit section below that. It's almost underneath that. And if you do like a short log, Git short log, you'll be able to see the groups of those different trailer information in a nice little display. It's pretty cool.
And what do you use it for?
Mostly tagging stuff and tag it like, for example, if you're using a tracker to keep track of this in a separate application, you'd have a URL for that. So you can add that to a particular trailer group. Or if you're trying to track a feature across commits, you can tag it with that particular feature and then trace that through your Git log.
There are things that read it just like everybody by sort of default, right? Like only grabs the top line of your Git commit message, right?
Right.
Like it's just there's a standard of basically like putting the stuff at the bottom of your commit that like certain things can read.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really have never really used a lot of trailer commits.
It's nice if you automate it, then you don't have to worry about it. But
yeah, when you posted this, I legitimately just looked up like a couple things and I saw like a couple, just like you were saying, there's like a couple apps out there, and I'll grab one of the links, but like a couple apps out there that like use trailer commits for like, for example, this one like creates a commit log, which I thought was actually an interesting way to use it. And then when you were saying that you use it to track features across, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that makes a lot more sense than putting my Jira ticket number at the very beginning of my commit message, right? For example.
Yep.
Especially when I have a whole bunch of tickets. I mean, you could do that for ordering reasons, but like when you're using it just to track, then you end up with a bunch of commits with the same first 10 digits.
Yeah, it's especially useful for like attaching it to merge commits where you don't want all the other commits to kind of affect that one particular impact on the code base, you can add the trailer information just to that. That way you can see just that in your log history of where that was introduced.
There we go. I found the link. Cool. Well, do we have any other things that we wanted to address before we hop into picks? Any questions that have not been said?
I would like to mention a gent we use. The name is Undercover. It verifies when we create a pull request, when the CI runs, it verifies if all the code is covered by the new code is covered by tests. So it helps us to prevent adding bugs because we didn't create tests. Because it's different. It's difficult to have all the code covered by tests, but we can start gradually. For example, to ensure that all new code are covered by tests. So Undercover helps with that. This is something we use, and I recommend.
Definitely. I'm down. Okay, so I had one more thing that I wanted to think. It was a comment that you said at the very beginning, Luke, and I just wanted to bring it up. You were just like, hey, like everyone does, like I store my keys in my code base, and just wanted to remind everyone, I don't think Luke was suggesting that we store AWS keys in our code. Luckily,
it's the best place for them. What happens if you lose your keys? If I lose my keys to my car, that's a big deal. Imagine losing the keys to my bucket.
Luckily, GitHub will tell you that you are storing your code in plain text, or that you're storing your keys in plain text in your code base. And then you'll need to change them. You can use Rails credentials if you're doing a Rails app, or you can use a variety of other ways. Half PSA / half just ribbing you, Luke.
It's the only way to learn, John. It's the only way to learn.
And thanks to Fabio's work, changing those keys won't bring down production.
Yes. And thank you, AWS, for forgiving my $30,000 in spend that somebody else who stole my keys at one time spent on my account. All right. Should we roll into picks?
Yep.
Alrighty.
Hey, folks, I don't know if you've noticed, but I've been working a lot on figuring out how to help people become the most valuable developers on their teams, or becoming the top 5% of developers in the field. If you're looking to level up, figure out how to contribute more, get the career you want, get the career that you want that will support the lifestyle you want, then you should check out the Most Valuable Dev Summit. I've invited some of my friends across the community, people that you've heard of, people that have worked on systems that you use on a daily basis, people who have invented new ways of doing things over the years in programming, and I've asked them one question, and that question is, how do you become a top 5% developer? How do you become 1 in 20 of the best developers out there? And so we're going to go ahead and have that conversation with them in interviews on the Most Valuable Dev Summit. And you can find that at summit.mostvaluable.dev.
Luke, do you want to start us off this week?
Well, last week we introduced Jeremy Evans, and I've been working my way through his online presentations. And that man's got a back catalogue. Let me tell you, there's some top-notch stuff in there. And one of the really interesting things I went through was his presentation on the evolution of the SQL gem. And a lot of that stuff, I think he gave a presentation in 2012, and a lot of that stuff's been very influential on a lot of libraries that come since, and his book's out. I'm also going to pick Dave, even though he's gone off this week. He did have a good episode out on driftingruby.com on cryptocurrency. If you want to use your Rails app to take advantage of the crypto market, which is either going through the roof or falling rapidly, depending on what time you listen to this broadcast, then he's got a great little episode on how to take in payments through the Coinbase API. My own Coinbase profile has lost so much money that Coinbase have stopped telling me how much I'd lost. It got down to about kind of 70% of my investment, and then they just decided it was too embarrassing and stopped putting it on the page. I'm convinced there's an if statement on that view, which is if investor is terrible, do not show them how much money they lost. And my last pick this week is unfortunately on the Amazon.co.uk store, because I want to get the right one. But we had a big storm this week. We had a lightning strike, and a production server, which I really, really needed to put some time critical work in, was taken out, as long with the power for the whole site. And this is a site about kind of 30 miles from where I live, so you can't just hop in the car. It's a big deal. And what do you know? The Amazon UPS that I bought worked. It correctly diagnosed the power outage, protected me from surges, powered the server down after its 7 minutes of life, and it came back up, and I completed my little project. So highly recommended. Now, the trick is to buy this exact model because there are two, and one of them I cannot get to talk to Linux at all. The model that I found works really well, really easy to set up, but the other one I've not found any way at all to get it to talk to a server, so I can't recommend it. That's my final pick. Very cheap, kind of $120, Amazon UPS.
Awesome. Darren, you got something for us today?
Definitely. Yeah. Real quick, adding to the cryptocurrency, the Coinbase API is great. It's got a free API that you can use to get prices. Of course, if you want to manage your own portfolio, like it sounds like Luke is, you do create an account with them, but it's very nice. Also, I will add that if you're relatively new to the cryptocurrency space, like let's say you started investing within the last 3 or 4 months, don't worry. The graphs do eventually go up. They don't just always go down. So hang in there. So my pick for this week, I'm going to go outside of the technology space. I'm saying I'm actually crying inside when I talk about that, but yeah, it'll go back up. So my pick is outside the technology space. It's a show. Maybe you all have seen it already. I just found out about it more recently. It's called Ted Lasso, and maybe the timing is good because the second season is about to come out. And it's about an American football coach who essentially gets hired to be a Premier League coach, so going to what the rest of the world calls football. And Jason Sudeikis is the actor, and he plays this folksy character from Kansas City somewhere, and knows nothing about football. And like the setup, it could be so cheesy, but like you can know what's going to happen, right? He's probably going to slowly win people over with his charm and his American Midwestern, just kind of happy-go-lucky attitude. But the writing is so good, and it's just one of the funniest shows. My wife and I just laugh out loud at each episode we watch. So Ted Lasso it's on Apple TV, which my family seems to collect streaming services. Like we used to collect baseball cards. Like we have a million. I wish we need to get rid of some. I don't even watch that much TV, but yes, it's on Apple TV. So Ted Lasso, very funny. Check it out if you have time.
Awesome. Valentino, got some picks?
Sure. So I have 2 picks really. One, I kind of just moved to a new house, and I'm a big hardware guy now. And so I've been slowly looking at how I can make my house automatically do stuff for me and kind of get telemetry data on it. And so I've been playing with this framework called Home Assistant. It's been pretty great so far. Lets me use some of my older Raspberry Pis to automate a ton of stuff for me. And to follow that up, I want to plug strace here. It's a great debugging tool that lets you attach to any running process. And I was making this app to listen. I wanted to make a little screen so that I could have a hub and see all the things that are connected in my house. And it kept just shutting off all of a sudden. And I was trying to figure out what was happening. So I reached for strace and just attached to the server that was running it. And I kept seeing, that this screen's software kept failing, running out of memory and trying to reconnect, reloading the screen and then failing. And so it just turned out that the Raspberry Pi I was using wasn't big enough, didn't have enough juice in it to support what I wanted to do with it with the screen. So it was just running out of resources. And so I was able to figure that out pretty quickly with strace. And so now my quest continues to plug more things into my house.
Nice.
You got the Zigbee going?
Yep.
That's very cool.
Yeah, if you're gonna go to any home automation, I highly recommend Zigbee or Z-Wave.
Good to know. I've been putting it off for a little bit longer, but one day I really want to be doing all that stuff. Anything else?
That's it for me.
Cool. All right. Well, I've got a couple. One was brought up during the show. I'll plug like a couple newsletters here or whatever. But I highly recommend if you feel like if you're like Luke and you're like, well, how did you find out about that, right? Highly
Right.
recommend reading a newsletter or two. Obviously, I've read Ruby Weekly for a very long time. There's a new one called Ruby Radar, which is put out by Andrew Mason and somebody else. Andrew Mason used to be on the show, so I'm still in contact with him, and some of you are. So I trust Andrew, and so far the content in it has been really good. We'll see. I can definitely recommend Ruby Weekly though. There's like a bunch of stuff in there from across the community every week. Just go read a bunch of stuff in there. You'll find about new stuff. So
+1
there,
is really good.
yeah. There's other newsletters too. Like these are two that like I'm paying attention to right now. But there could be other ones that maybe you like or something. But a newsletter will help you get some of that stuff. And then second, I was playing with something this week, and then actually in today's, well, I get Ruby Weekly on Thursdays, but it was in Ruby Weekly today or whatever, or there was an article talking about it today, which is from FRUM, which is basically so it's just another Ruby manager. So RBM, RVM, CH Ruby, like those are the ones that we've had for forever. From is a Ruby manager written in Rust. It's definitely faster. I haven't had a lot of time with it, because I've only started playing with it this week, but it's definitely faster. I have no complaints. I've been very happy. First of all, I love RBM. Been very happy with it throughout the years. I've used it, back when before I started doing servers using Docker, I would actually use RBM instead of some of the others. The only other I stopped using RVM on servers. It was such a problem child for me. But the other one that I would use on servers occasionally would be CHRuby. So those are the two that like I've been a champion of over the years. Nothing against RVM. I think it's fine. If you already have it installed and things like that. Like I personally just didn't like it. So, but this one, anyway, we'll see how it goes. But so far, it's been good. It's really fast. Not that I could really tell that much of a difference. I can definitely tell that it's faster, like loading some stuff. Because I don't have problems with RBM, I don't know that I'm necessarily going to be able to tell a large difference, but it's worth checking out. So it was cool. All right, Fabio, did you have any picks for us?
Yeah, I have 3 picks. So the first one is a gem that we wrote at WeTransfer. Actually, I'm the main contributor. The name is WT Active Record Index Spy. We can use this gem to spy pieces of code which are running queries in the database to see if they are using a proper index. For example, if you run a query and there are no index to cover this query, the gem will raise an error. You can use it in your test suite, and there is a RSpec matcher that you can use to use around a method. It works better with MySQL. It supports Postgres as well, but it doesn't work so very well with Postgres. We need some contribution from someone who knows more Postgres than me. So the next pick is series of posts by Thoughtbot. They are talking about the debugging. So they explain lots of things. For example, how a process that you can use to, like a scientific process, to understand what is the problem, to list your assumptions, to prove the assumptions, to test possible scenarios to fix problems. So it's very interesting. I discovered that listening to the Bike Shed podcast a few episodes ago, and I definitely recommend it. And the third pick is using Fitbit. I like Brett's sports. I like running, cycling, what else? And then my healthcare provider here in the Netherlands, there is a program. The name of the company is Vitality, I think, and they give me the option to buy a Fitbit. And every month, every week, if I continue practicing sports, and then I need to submit the data to them, then I receive a cashback. So in 2 years, they will pay me the Fitbit. And every week, I'm receiving like €5 because I'm practicing sports. So I'm earning money to practice sports. So it's very cool. And that's it.
That's a sweet deal.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. All right. Well, Fabio, if people want to get in touch with you or follow you or anything, how do they do that?
Yeah, I have a Twitter profile. I don't use it too much, but sometimes I write things related to the jams that I contribute, or sometimes the posts that I write. And the name is Fabio Perrella. It's my name and my surname. And yeah, I have also a blog. It's like a personal website, and it's actually a GitHub page. So fabioperrella.github.io.
Awesome. Sweet. And we'll make sure that we get those in the show notes and everything too. So cool. Alrighty. Well, thanks everybody for coming out and listening to us today. We'll see you on the next episode.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.